Good afternoon. It's Joyful Hermit. Happy St. Stephen's Day. He was considered the first Christian martyr and was stoned to death. I always sort of include John the Baptist, though. He lost his head for Christ, but was before Christ was crucified. John the Baptist was killed, as most all of you know. Today I'm going to talk about stigmata. This is because I was reminded of this whole topic by a viewer who has such terrible pain in the feet, especially the feet, and also in the skin, such as would be in the skin of her hands probably, and side and shoulder, maybe her head. So it reminded me, her feet pain reminded me of Padre Pio, who had external, visible stigmata. Stigmata is a mystical phenomenon that is representative and imitation of the wounds of Christ, and generally considered 5 wounds. That would be the hands, the feet, the sword in the side, the nail marks in the hands and the feet, and the sword in the side, as well as some also consider a shoulder wound, which would be from when he carried the cross, and it made tradition says that he had a wound in his shoulder from that. And then also the crown of thorns is sometimes considered yet another wound, so it can go up to 7 wounds. But usually the main 5 are considered as the authentic traditional stigmata. But Rita of Cassia had a thorn come into her forehead by force. It was a mystical thing, but it was an actual thorn. And it was pulled out, but there was always fresh blood there on her forehead. And these things are very real. They're very painful, these external stigmata. Padre Pio's stigmata came when he was praying before a crucifix, when he had finally gotten to San Giovanni Rotondo in Italy, in Foggia, outside of Foggia, Italy. This would have been, it was 50 years to the day before his death. On September 23rd, 1968, he passed away. He was 81 years old then. So it would have been, what would that be? Somewhere around 1918, maybe? Yeah, September of 1918, I think, that he had the stigmata come to him. An angel stood. As he prayed, an angel appeared and had a sword that was flaming. And the sword sent these, or it was probably St. Michael, that's who they think, sent these darts of rays of light and fire at one fell swoop into his hands, feet, and into his side. And the pain was excruciating. He screamed and collapsed on the floor. Some other monks heard the noise, and came and found him like that. They called the superior, it's Franciscan monastery, and got him to his cell, bound his wounds, cleaned him up and bound his wounds. And they bled over a cup of day every day for the next 50 years. And he died on the very day of his stigmata happening. But he went through a terrible time period himself also, with doubts and concern that maybe somehow the devil had done that to him. Evil, forces of evil. He went through lots of examinations. The Vatican was notified because they didn't go away. They waited a while. They kept him in his cell No one was the two who found him and the abbot. They all decided no one was going to talk about it to anyone. It wasn't to get out. But of course, something like that did leak out. It was so profound and unusual. And so townspeople found out, and people started coming to the monastery wanting to see Padre Pio, wanting to see his wounds. He would wear gloves that were cut off at the fingers, black gloves, or brown. They were brown or black. He had a brown Franciscan habit. And he had to wrap the wounds in his hands, his feet, and his side, keep something on his side because of the constant bleeding. And he would wash out these bandages at night and put fresh on, and just that was his life for the next 50 years. And curiosity people, but they kept him in his cell, brought food to his cell. He was really kept hidden, even within the monastery. And then an investigation began. And one doctor who came, or no, it was I think a Monsignor who came, or a cardinal, and became very angry toward Padre Pio, very envious and resentful that he had that gift. And he lied. He went back to the Vatican and lied and said that this priest had brought it on himself and was faking it and using iodine or reopening these cuts every night to make them bleed, and that it wasn't authentic. So then Padre Pio was put basically sort of under house arrest when that came back from the Vatican, that they were deeming it not authentic. And of course, there was a handful of people in his monastery who were against him, resented it. It brings out envy in people when someone has mystical phenomenon. In other people, it brings out a lot of doubt. It's hard for them to trust and to wonder, is this for real? Is this, or what's this person pulling? Or did they want attention? Or is it psychological even? Is it something in his psyche that's making these things happen? Because he was too intently praying, and the image and watching Christ on the cross of this statue, this crucifix with a corpus, a model of what Christ might have looked like on it, and the blood coming out of his wounds. Did that subconsciously affect Padre Pio to the point that his own love of Christ made these wounds psychologically, but in actuality, appear? So he went through that kind of people thinking that investigation. Or was it just outright fraud? He was just fraudulent. And then, of course, some felt and believed, because he was a very wonderful soul. He had been gifted from childhood in being able to see and talk with his guardian angel. And he had other mystical gifts, that of sometimes of the portent of knowing the future of someone, or reading a soul, being able to see into a soul and know what sins they had, or what life problems they had, or other situations. He had the gift of bilocation, although I don't think that gift had occurred yet. I think that came a little later. Usually with mystical phenomenon, it isn't that everything happens at once. It's like we've been talking about with our spiritual progression. It's gradual. It's bit by bit by bit. And he had been having pains for quite a while beforehand, before the angel appeared, and these dart-like rays of fire and light went into him to cause the wounds. He had been having pains in these areas of his body and didn't say anything. He had told his spiritual director, Padre Benedetto, who he would write to. Padre Benedetto was sent to a different monastery, because even with that, after this happened to Padre Pio, he no longer was allowed his spiritual father, Padre Benedetto, to be his director anymore, which was very hard on him because Padre Pio had lots of phenomenon and mystical things that would happen that this priest knew about and understood him for several years. And to have him taken away kind of as a punishment in a sort of way of, they thought they were being protective not only of Padre Pio, but of the reputation of the friars. They didn't want to have fraud coming on or something like that, destroying their good that they were doing, or having a deluge of people coming instead of worshiping Christ, in effect worshiping this man because he had these mystical experiences. Things can get very out of hand with the public. And it started to. So throngs of people were coming as word spread. So he was kept in his cell, fed in his cell. He was allowed to go to the library once a day to celebrate Mass there. And they did allow one, I think it might have been a novice might come and help altar serve, to help him when he was celebrating Mass by himself. And other than that, he was not allowed to hear confessions, which crushed him because he was a true priest, deep down, true blue. He loved serving people and serving God. He was not allowed to celebrate Mass for anyone just by himself with the one helper. And he was not allowed to talk to anyone. He was not allowed to write letters. He had a big correspondence going. And, well, not as big as it became later, of course, but he wrote to other people, and he had spiritual daughters who had come to know him as a priest even before he was at San Giovanni Rotondo. People from his hometown also knew he was holy and would write and ask spiritual and practical advice of him. He was shut down as a person and as a priest. And it took a few years for this to get straightened out and the truth to come forth. So, and he had been ordered, he did have a new spiritual director, Father Agostino, who was there at the monastery. But he didn't get to see him often either. So it was a very most difficult time for Padre Pio and for others, for those who knew, for his mother and father who were worried about him, because these were painful wounds. Miraculously, they never got infected. And starting about maybe 2 to 3 days before he died, before his the 50th year of this happening to him, his skin started to change in those spots. They started to heal. And on the day he died, they had become like fresh skin of an infant over those wound areas, his hands, his feet, and his side. So that's sort of the case of Padre Pio. And one time, I've mentioned this in another video, some journalists were asking him questions, and he was always being beleaguered by people. He had no life of his own after that, after he was allowed to celebrate Mass again and hear confessions. The lines would be so long, people would come for days to wait in line to have Padre Pio hear their confessions and give them advice, because often he would know things about their life and would advise them on things that were supernatural that he would know about. So word spread. He even became known to in other countries. People from other countries would come. He intervened in a war strike on San Giovanni Rotondo and the town of Foggia, Italy, during World War II. He bilocated The German planes came and the American planes were coming. And they were going to have an air fight over and near Foggia, near the monastery. And Padre Pio, they saw this monk up in the air, high, even with his arms outstretched, in a brown Franciscan habit, beard, and I think he put his hand up like this. The German pilots, fighter pilots, were so distressed they immediately turned and headed back to Germany. The American pilots saw this and were stunned and turned and got to the nearest air base to land. And word spread about this friar that they had seen up in the sky. And it wasn't just one person who saw it, so they knew they had seen something unusual. And since they landed in Italy, because they were there in that area, and we're talking about it, and someone figured had to be Padre Pio, showed them an image of him, a picture of him. Yes, that was the man in the sky. So word spread even more in America then and all over from that incident alone. He had the gift of bilocation by then and could be different places where he was needed. But also his body would be sound asleep in his cell at the monastery, or his body would be celebrating Mass, while his body also was someplace else, in other countries even. And he has appeared many times since and has done healings of people in corporeal vision form, where he would actually touch them or grab their leg or something was broken or maimed and instantaneously heal it and order them stand up and rise and walk. And that was after he died. That happened to a woman in England, an Episcopalian woman who was miraculously healed by Padre Pio. Did not know who it was, but ironically, in the village church or the town church, the next night, or maybe it was even that night, someone was going to come and talk about Padre Pio. He had been dead maybe 20 years by then, or 15 years, maybe in the 80s or 70s. And so she went, and she was going to go anyway to hear about this Padre Pio, and in the vestibule of the church was a picture of him. That was the man who had come into her home and had touched her, healed her, told her to stand up and walk, and she was able to walk when she was permanently unable to prior to that time. So a little boy in a hospital in the United States was healed, or I think it was the United States, maybe France. But anyway, he has been a very active intercessor and healer and miracle worker, wonder worker. And he was a great priest and a great person in the confessional. He would be 18 hours hearing confessions. The demand was so great. And something he knew, a woman's husband had died. He had thrown himself over a bridge in despair because something terrible had happened. He had lost all their farm and income and everything. He went into a despair and killed himself. The wife was just beside herself about her husband, convinced that he surely had gone to hell for killing himself. Waited in line like 3 days. Padre Pio came out. He knew that he would know sometimes who was there waiting for him, and he knew the line wouldn't move fast enough. He went out and found her in the line and simply said, "Do not worry, be at peace, dry your tears. Your husband is all right. There's a long time between the bridge and the water." That's all he said. So she knew that in that time her husband had been forgiven by God. God understood and had gotten a grip on himself. Of course, it was too late, but he had not been cast into hell. He was saved. Padre Pio had told her, don't worry, he was all right. He was in a good place. So, but another woman who had visited with her friend in Italy, and had met Padre Pio. She was not Catholic. She didn't go to confession, but she met him and talked with him briefly. And her friend was Catholic and had gone to confession and seen him and talked with him. The friend had gone back to New York City, where she lived, and had committed suicide. But Padre Pio told the suicide victim's friend, when she asked him what happened, how is she? Is she okay? He said, I'm sorry. No, she didn't make it. She shouldn't have done that. She knew better. So that is another way of giving indication also, as other people have, of people with near-death experiences have reported that God has mercy when a person is truly not in command of their mental faculties or their emotions. There's a lot of variables when someone commits suicide, in other words. And if the person knows and chooses, even knowing it's wrong, and does it, that's not good at all. That's not the same as someone who has gone into a despair and is out of their mind and has no control over their thoughts and does that. So, Padre Pio is an amazing person, but what he went through, having external stigmata, with people all his life, some who were resentful, doctors were curious, people were curious, always pestering him, and a big concern that was a reality, and he didn't like it, was people more interested in his stigmata than in Jesus Christ and the Mass that he was celebrating. And that was greatly distressing to him. But he was stuck. God chose him to have these stigmata. And the good that came of it was that so many people all around the world knew about him. They started sending money to him and gifts, as thank you or something, whatever. It's sort of a human nature thing. Odd in a way, but we do that. We gift people who, holy person. Obviously he was chosen because he was a very good soul and would handle it well. He never spoke about it. These journalists asked, does that hurt? He did snap. He says, well, it certainly, I forget how he put it, but something about, it's not for laughs or something, obviously, he made it, it's obviously, yes, it hurts, of course, what do you think? Of course it hurts, how would you feel if you had holes and were bleeding? He didn't say all that, but he gave that sense back to them, which immediately stopped their mouths. They were, creating a rabble around him, interviewing him and pestering him and photographs, and people hoping they could get a sneak peek because he would take his gloves off when he celebrated Mass. They'd line up at 4 a.m. for Mass so that they could get up close. They wanted to be able to see when he held up the host. They wanted to see his wounds. And see, that's totally against. Padre Pio was a lover of God. He didn't want to be the distraction. So it was painful for him emotionally in that way. But he did much good, and he got this, the Virgin Mary, I think, wanted him to build this hospital for the poor, especially for children. Hospital for Suffering, it's called. It's there to this day. It was a state-of-the-art, the best hospital in Italy. So many people sent money in because he wanted to do something with all this money coming in. So they developed a board and some doctors and different wealthy people and good people who organized, a banker maybe or somebody to handle the money, the finances. And people sent even more money in for the good cause. So he did much good in his life in a practical, tangible way also, with what people were giving. He wanted it to go for something worthwhile and good. So that's Padre Pio's story. There are other people, many people have had external stigmata, but it is still rare. When I say many, that's over the centuries. And it's thought maybe even the Apostle Paul, because he said that he was wounded, had a thorn in his side, that the Lord gave him a thorn in his side. There's much debate over what that was. Some think maybe it was a wound, a stigmata wound. We don't know. Let's see who else I was going to mention. Oh, well, like Therese Neumann, a laywoman from Germany, I think maybe Austria, Hungary, I think one of those countries. During World War II, she had the stigmata. Uneducated farm woman, not married, simple, very simple woman. She would have the stigmata starting on, I think, Thursday evening or Friday, Friday, and on every Friday through Sunday, in replication of Christ's sufferings when he was crucified. Some would have it also every Friday. I had somebody earlier today, another saint that had the external. Oh, Catherine of Siena had external stigmata. But it was a problem for her too. In Siena, the people, the hassles, the investigation that was going to happen. It put them through the ringer. Then they're kept away, locked up. They can't talk to people. It creates quite a problem in towns for something like that, and in parishes. She begged the Lord to take it away from her, and God did. He removed the external stigmata and left her with the internal pain, the internal suffering in those areas. I've read so many different mystics, I probably should have written down, but some would have maybe just in their hands and their feet. One maybe just in the side only. Some it would be intermittent, come and go. But Catherine of Siena wrote about her interior stigmata, and the pain of that, to her, felt even greater on the inside without it showing than the external bleeding stigmata. It's more painful, but many people are unaware of interior stigmata. So, but that's a reality of having interior suffering in those wound areas or around the head, and just in like where the crown of thorns on Jesus's head would sit. Tremendous pain just in that area of the head all around. And then also the shoulder on some people can be very, very painful with external or interior, but mostly these are interior. Most of the stigmata are interior, and therefore it's not known. People don't talk about it. They might tell their spiritual director about it. Probably would. I will say that I had a time period where I had these. And I had the sensation of blood coming out of the bottom of each of my feet. Pain and blood coming out. I would feel it running. And I would look in my sheets or in my socks, take my shoe up. It was just so real. And the pain, it made it hard to take steps. But that dissipated in time. And then from time to time, I'd get that around the head. I haven't for a long time, but I used to, like at Mass. In fact, the Mass where my mystical ecstasy first became more prominent, I had heart wound. My heart was so painful and like expanding. It was very painful. And my head, I had to grab my head. It was just unbearable. It was during the consecration it got extreme. And Reverend Monsignor asked me after but you seemed to be troubled. He sort of was in a way laughing. It looked just sort of like, what is it now with this one, and what's going on, or was I? But he was also sort of concerned, because he was genuine, but questioning it. And I told him, I said, something strange has been going on the last few masses that I've been to the last few days. It just keeps getting this strange feeling worse. And I said, tonight it was my head. No, it was in the morning. It was Monday morning on Labor Day, at the end of August of 2008. It was that Mass where the head was just terrible, and my heart. And I told him. And then as it progressed, we knew then that I was losing my faculty, but it was a slow progression. It wasn't boom all at once. And fortunately, the Holy Spirit gave me like a inner vision. I was sitting in a chair reading in a house. I had slouched in a chair. I never sit, but it was a recliner type. So I was like slouched back in this chair on my feet up on the footstool, and I saw this row of books, and this one book became highlighted in my mind's eye, and it said Mystical Phenomenon. And I thought, I had gotten so many books because I knew I needed to educate myself. So I collected all this library. They were on the bookshelves. I went in there and started looking. I saw the section of books, and lo and behold, there was this book that I had seen from the living room in my inner sight, though. Mystical Phenomenon. I pulled it out. It was by Monsignor Albert Farge. It was translated from the French in 1926. I started reading it. I looked in the index because I had been thinking about, what is this that's happening to me? And why is it so strange? It seemed to be getting worse, and I couldn't understand it. Heavier, deeper, and stronger during Mass. So I then went to the section. This Monsignor, he was very adept in the supernatural and in mystical phenomena, wrote this fat book on all types. And sure enough, it explained the whole thing. How it's gradually, usually, not always, but usually gradual. And every aspect that I had questions about, that book answered. And that's the book that I asked my bishop to please read. But he refused ultimately. He said he would if I would stand in the back of the chapel, and then something bad happened to me. But then he wouldn't read it then. He said, no, I'm the one that says what books to read. You don't tell me. And I hadn't told him. I had just asked him, please. He would have understood what was happening to me. And I had offered it also to my spiritual father, but he said no, he didn't need to read it. He just listened, and he didn't. He seemed okay, and he trusted me, but I didn't know until about 10 years later that he really had all through that time had questioned, because he couldn't figure out why I wasn't being accepted at Mass, why I wasn't accepted. And also, I think what bothered him, because he didn't know, he'd never known anyone with this. None of them had in that diocese. Why I wasn't receiving communion, tangible host. It got so deep, I had no faculties to open my mouth or anything. during communion time. In fact, during the consecration, it would go deeper than ever. So this isn't a stigmata, but this is how things can progress and go. But also how you get treated and questioned and doubted. But it was about 10 years later, my spiritual father had read something that Dom Marmion had written. Dom Columba Marmion, blessed. He was French, but he was an Irish saint. He lived most of his priesthood and his monastic life in Ireland in the 1800s, I believe. And my spiritual father was Irish and liked Columba Marmion and read what he had said about this kind of situation and wrote to me and said, "It's okay. I understand now." Dom Columba Marmion explains why you're being fed mystically. You don't need the tangible host. God has taken you to a different realm where you are receiving communion at a deeper level, invisible level to the human eye. So he was all right, but I realized even he, all those years, had that question going on in his mind. He just hadn't told me, and I'm glad he didn't, because he knew I felt I was all alone. I'd been run out of places, doubted, mocked, and it wasn't me. It was this beautiful ecstasy with the explanation of the beauty and the power of the Mass within me going on at the same time that would have been very beneficial, I would have thought, for the priest to know about. But what's for me to say, really? We just have to go with God's flow in these things. But with those who have the external stigmata, I think there's a Lutheran woman, a couple of Lutheran women, maybe in the United States, or at least one, who had the external stigmata at least 20 years ago or so, and through history, others. And of course, the hagiographers, the writers of their biographies, make it all seem wonderful. But Catherine of Siena, when she had her external stigmata, and she was having an ecstasy in Mass also, she did for a time period. And they didn't like it. The rector had ushers pick her up out of the pew because she couldn't move, take her out and dump her on the sidewalk. And people would come along and kick her and pinch her to see if she really couldn't move, would hurt her to see if she'd flinch. So I had that happen with me with that ecstasy, but not kicked, but, well, yes, I was kicked in the pew, but I wasn't taken out and dumped on the sidewalk, but I was pinched down to the bone, and people thinking I was being rude or just testing. And but she or maybe it was one other, they would have pins put in them even to test them to see if they would flinch. Cruel, really cruel. But there are people who will fake something like that. They can. Now, the stigmata is very hard to fake. The only other thing they do have to check with stigmata is to make sure it's not coming from the devil. Because there was a person in St. Teresa of Avila's monastery's system, one of her houses, her foundations, who had a nun who had made a pact with the devil, and she was given unusual phenomenon, but her attitude and her daily life wasn't in sync with a holy person all the way through. And Teresa of Avila had her own gifts of inner sight, and finally got out of this sister that, yes, she had made a pact with the devil in exchange for spiritual gifts. She wanted to stand out and be more important, to be noticed. But then she realized that she was in a bad way, because the devil wasn't she had things she had to do for the devil. It isn't just an easy thing if you make a pact with the devil. It's serious and dangerous. And she was the devil's slave. And she begged. And so they had to have an exorcism, had to have an exorcist priest come and exorcise this nun. And she removed herself, I think, from the convent then. In shame, she was shamed. But she was forgiven. But, it's a terrible thing that happened. But so her mystical gifts, and I don't think she had stigmata, I forget. But maybe. But anyway, all of those left immediately because it was all phony. It was from the devil. The devil can imitate things. So that has to be tested. But with interior stigmata, this person that I mentioned, who's a viewer, and I had written and said, it reminds me of Padre Pio's stigmata and the pain that you have in your feet and things, and probably your hands are hurting. And the person felt that yes, that she hadn't thought of it before, but realized what an honor and felt chosen to have the suffering she had then. And that's a wonderful attitude and perspective to have. And it is a faith thing. When it's in the interior, in those areas, like when I would get the crown of thorn pain, I would call it that. And I had that back even in the mid to late 90s and on, just now and then during Mass. It would be during Mass. Sometimes when I would have my big pain sieges, my wound areas would be very painful. My side, my feet, my hands, especially my feet. And I felt that it was interior stigmata. God never appeared, or Jesus didn't, to say, no, this is what it is. I just sensed that it probably was. And I cooperated with God with the suffering. And it made me realize it was a responsibility to have that kind of pain, those wound areas, because it was linking me with Christ's suffering and his wounds. And I think there are many, many people who have interior stigmata, temporarily, now and then, once maybe, when they were praying, they felt the pains, the wounds, or gradually and has been all the time, or in just a couple areas of where Christ's wounds are. And it's the kind of thing that is an honor and a joy to suffer for Christ. But it is one of those things generally not to talk about at all, because it's a private kind of thing. And here I am explaining it and talking about examples of times or things that I've had. And I feel a little bit odd about that. And it's, I just think my main reason for not really telling others about it is the problems that develop from other people. The envy that gets stirred up in other people who resent, the hullabaloo that comes on the person, the attacks that come, because who do you think you are to think that you have these, that you share in Christ's wounds? Who do you think you are? You get a lot of different barbs cast at you, and it's in a way good to just have it be very private. Now, if you have family members or parents or something who are very religious and understand and trust you and aren't going to, accuse you of faking or something like that, or trying to get attention. You're trying to get attention. I've heard that with interior stigmata also. Just pray about it. But that's why I'm sharing about external stigmata when that happens, it does become a responsibility for the church to check and to make sure that it's a reality, that it's not being used for notoriety or for people to seem really holy and people start sending money to them like they did with Padre Pio. Of course, they knew he was legitimate by then, but it can be a responsibility is what I'm saying. And but the glory of it and the beauty of it is that it unites the person with Christ and his sufferings. And it helps us in our hearts, minds, and souls to realize the magnitude of feeling and sensing what Christ felt and sensed when he was being crucified or before when he was carrying that cross. When the crown was crammed down onto his head. It is an honor and a joy to have that kind of linkage with Jesus Christ and his sufferings. And it puts more of our heart behind our suffering. We find ourselves not complaining as much because we understand that this has been a gift given us. The interior also. The exterior, I say, is also, but it is another echelon, another level of mystical phenomenon that requires more of investigation by, they'd probably bring in different kinds of priests that are more specialists or from other states maybe. I don't know. Sometimes they just let it ride and they don't do anything about it and wait. They can wait 5-10 years and tell the person you are not to say a word to anyone in the parish or something like that. And then they discern, they check to make sure. Does this person have a psychological problem? And they're making this up? They go through all kinds of attitudes and aspects of external stigmata and any kind of phenomenon, mystical phenomenon. I remember in a diocese they told me there was some woman that levitated. She would be in the pew and would levitate up a few inches. And yes, it caused people to turn and stare and talk and wonder what's going on. And everyone was told, don't talk about it, just keep it quiet. Keep your attention on worship and on Christ, not on the person. And I don't know if that continued or if it stopped. But the reason mystical phenomenon happens is because God allows it for a reason, a purpose, a good purpose. And it's often a sign, but it's always used for God and for love and for magnifying God, glorifying God. So and it also then can be for something in the person's life, such as to be a victim soul, be called to suffer, in which that's most often when there would be some kind of interior suffering going on, that the person would feel it and it would continue in those areas. Or it could be a one-time thing, but strong enough so that you sense and realize it's not my finger, it's in my hand, it's in my piercing feeling, or in the wrist bone, or because some feel that Christ was crucified with the nail in his wrists. The stigmata have been found both places when it comes in external, and it could be interior also that way. Or if your feet you have a point of wound, feeling, a sensation that is very painful. And it's a wonderful thing. And it's not, I think more people need to examine when they suffer and pay attention. Where is my pain? And if it is in those areas, including the shoulder and around the head, think of Christ and understand that you are participating in his sufferings, physically, interiorly, unseen, but still it is in those areas. Give glory to God for that. And if it happens, it often happens to remind us that our suffering is not in vain, that we are not in charge of our suffering also, but we are responsible to try to suffer well and to unite our sufferings with Christ and his sufferings, which are in those areas of his body. On earth they were. And so it's a mystical event, external or interior, and it can come and go, and don't worry. In fact, if it goes, don't think, oh, I've done something wrong. They aren't our possessions. They are gifts given. They are reminders given to help us. Maybe we've been struggling with suffering and to the point of nearly despair, or of wanting to give up, or of, like I was doing with the internet, just anything to distract my mind from the pain. Just dumb stuff. Doze off, And I wasn't focusing on the actual suffering and offering it as prayer, or thinking of Christ and that I was being united with Christ and glorifying him because of that. But once I'm reminded of these things and had my zeal renewed a few months ago, I'd been praying for that, and I know Father Vincent in Nigeria had been praying that I would have a renewal, a deeper conversion, because I was tired. I was just waiting for Jesus to come get me so I could die. And not upset by that at all, looking forward to it. But I was squandering the suffering I had and squandering time that God gave me. So it's a reminder, it's a sign, it increases our faith, these things do. If it's external, it increases the faith of other people. Padre Pio. But it wasn't easy for him. He would have preferred not, and he asked to have them taken away. And God didn't with him. He did with Catherine of Siena. He took them away, the physical, the exterior, and left the interior suffering in those areas. So that's some about stigmata and other sufferings in union with Christ. And it's okay. This one person did mention to me, because I tried to explain why I think, it's best to, there's really no need to go tell, say, a bishop or a priest if you have interior stigmata, or anyone. If you have a spiritual friend who's close, who won't become envious. So like parents won't. They don't envy their children usually. They're very happy for their children for things. Or if you have a support network of parents or a sister that supports you in your suffering or whatever, you can share this, because then they can remind you when this going gets rough. Remember, these are Christ's wounds you're suffering, and suffer them for him. That will give a renewed sense of courage and purpose to build you up. So those are the good reasons for telling someone. And also so they can be happy for you, that you have found a joy and honor in the suffering, because you have been given this gift of suffering interiorly in the areas that Christ did, in the areas of his body. And then when you're laying there at night and you can't sleep, you can, and you feel those areas so strongly, your feet, you can place yourself with Christ. Hold on to him on the cross or something, and to thank him for having your suffering united with his and being in union with you in suffering, and offer all your suffering for him, for all the souls in the world, all the souls who are progressing on the other side and are wanting it to go a little faster. So use it for good. I just wanted to express that if you have interior, you might be opening up Pandora's box if you tell a priest or a bishop if they don't understand, because they could start deciding that you have a psychological issue. I have not found priests, my spiritual father, priest of nearly 72 years, he had not heard of interior stigmata. I don't just read the biographies of people. I get their letters, and I get the old books written way back, closer to their time period, because they tend to be more accurate. And so that's how I learned about it. And in this mystical phenomenon, mentioned interior stigmata also. But it's a book, it's out of print. These books I have are old, and that's why I had at one point had sort of wanted to have this hermitage so that people could come like a spiritual bed and breakfast. Come for quiet, for a weekend, or for a night, or for even a day, and read some of the books or something that I have here that, are wonderful books that I've collected. So on these topics. But I don't know if that's going to come to pass or not, or if it's even a prudent thing to think about doing. It would be very hard to screen people or to deal with how they'd get here. Then my anonymity would be gone and my location and all. But I'll pray about it and see. But the place has to get finished first. But that had always been an idea I've had for about 23 years now, to have a place that people could come for silence. Or if they wanted to talk about spiritual matters for an hour with me, fine. And wouldn't have to pay, leave a donation if they wanted, but otherwise, and help themselves to the kitchen and stuff like that. But we'll see. Anyway, stigmata, I'm mostly focusing on interior. If you have the exterior, you would know it. There was a young girl who had it in Ohio. I think she still might, if she's still alive, little girl. And the bishop, but it's a huge process. When there's something that they have to clear and investigate to make sure it's not some kind of fraud or a psychological issue, it gets a nightmare for the person going through it. And it was part of Padre Pio's sufferings to endure what he endured, and the others who have gone through it. I think there might be a woman somewhere in Texas who has the exterior stigmata, and that got validated. It was validated. And I think they had known her so long in her town that it wasn't as big of an ordeal for her. But it can get brutal, and so I guess I'm protective of people enough. I've been there where, just even with this mystical ecstasy, what I went through with that, until my spiritual father said, just stay away. It was getting bad, very bad, what they were doing and how they were behaving. Parishioners also. And I've never been one to think it's right or good that others are doing terrible things, sinning out of something that is good, because of human nature causes that. The envy, the anger, the misunderstandings, because I wasn't allowed to say anything, all of that can happen with stigmata and will. And it's not that if you have it, then of course you go through that. But if it's interior, I just think, why bang the gong and cause it's more of a personal thing. If it's an interior stigmata, God means it for you and him, or he would have it be external if he wanted it to be a sign for others. So I had mentioned it to my spiritual father, these things that would come and go, and I think he just nodded or something. I mean, it was, and I told him about Catherine of Siena and how I learned about interior stigmata, but I also let him know when they were dissipating, weren't intermittent. So it was for a season for me, I think, to increase my faith and to help me suffer better, and to deal with it better, and also to make the linkage with God. It was before I knew about victim souls of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and being called to suffer. It was before I was told that you're called to suffer by God. So, okay, that's enough on all this. Just explaining. And yes, it is fine if people want to learn on their own. I feel that since I've had these experiences, I need to say the things that can happen. And my advice would be, if you have interior stigmata, not to in general talk about it. And don't think about it too much yourself even, because it can become then, I mean, the devil will use anything to get to our egos. If we think, oh wow, it can twist us a little bit. Or we start looking for it even, like, well, is it in my heart also, or is it in my shoulder? Or it might be, but I guess I'm just more, let it happen as God wants it to happen, and I try to keep myself out of it as best as possible. But with this one viewer, it just hit me with the suffering of the feet, especially, that she likely has interior stigmata, because her ailments came upon her. They just came. It wasn't like she had hurt herself or anything like that. So, and it is a great honor, and I think it's given the person a major lift in the oppressive suffering she undergoes. Every breath she takes, every moment of her life, is just terrible pain in her feet especially, and to be able to understand the gift she's been given and to unite herself with Christ's wounds. His strength, his suffering will help her get through this life of suffering she has. And her parents will support her too and are overjoyed. And it's been turned to the honor and joy that suffering is. So it's good. Anyway, God bless his real presence in us. And don't doubt, though, too much. You can doubt a little. Put yourself through a little bit of an examination if you start to have pains in the wound areas of Christ. It really isn't an unusual thing for Christians who suffer constant suffering to have a linkage of their suffering with Christ's wounds. Rejoice in that, recognize it, and thank Christ, and have an uplifted look at those body areas, your feet, your hands, your head, your heart, your side, shoulder, and meditate on Christ's wounds in those areas. That will give you strength, give us strength to suffer with a better attitude and a greater courage and joy. Have a beautiful evening, and thank you so much for all the great comments and the information. I'm very grateful for the viewer who this whole topic then came up out of her wounds, her sufferings. So I think it's an important one for all of us to know, because I think it's sad when we have those sufferings and those wounds and we don't recognize that they are linked directly with Christ's wounds. It's sort of like we're ignoring a massive, great honor and joy with Christ. So it's a good thing. It's a positive thing. Take care, and I just about said, but I will say it. I love you all. I really do.